The storm was already winning. Snow didn't fall so much as it attacked, driven sideways by a wind sharp enough to peel bark off a pine. The air stung like a swarm of needles, and the sky had disappeared behind a wall of white. Nothing moved in this kind of storm. No rider, no wolf, not even a desperate hunter. Except for a child. Nolly walked with her head bowed, her tiny legs sinking to the knees with every step. The cold gnawed at her like a hungry thing. Her hair, dark, wild, tangled with ice, slapped her cheeks. Her breath came in broken gasps. She held a corn-husk doll to her chest. The red ribbon around its neck frozen stiff like a strip of old leather. She should have turned back hours ago. But she had no idea where back was anymore. Her mother's footprints had been her only guide for most of the morning, faint impressions pressed into the snow before the storm rose. For a while, Nolly had shuffled from print to print, murmuring reassurance to herself, telling the doll Mama left these. Mama's close. Mama's coming back. But the storm was greedy. It buried the tracks one gust at a time until there was nothing left to follow. Now Nolly walked through guesswork and hope, though both were fading fast. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mama?" I called. No answer. Not even an echo. The world had shrunk to the sound of wind tearing across the ridge and the slow, deliberate crunch of her boots. She stumbled, falling forward onto both hands. Snow filled her sleeves, burning her arms with icy teeth. She lay there a long moment, her breath fogging weakly against the drift. She wanted to sleep. She wanted the cold to stop hurting. She wanted her mother. Instead, she pushed herself up on trembling elbows, her doll's head poked out of the snow beside her. She kissed it before picking it up, the gesture automatic, a promise she didn't fully understand, but felt deep in her bones. "One more," she whispered. "One more step." The wind shoved her sideways, but she kept moving. She didn't see the danger below a thin crust of ice over a buried creek. The moment she stepped on it, the ground groaned, cracked, and dropped. One of her boots plunged into freezing water. She screamed, scrambling backward, fingers clawing at a rotten branch. The branch tore at her skin, leaving bright streaks of blood on the bark, but she used it to haul herself out. She collapsed on her knees, shaking uncontrollably. The storm didn't care, but fate, or something like it, had not abandoned her entirely. Through the white veil of winter, a faint glow appeared far ahead. At first she thought it was another trick of the wind, but it held steady, warm, golden flickering. A lantern, a window, a home. Nolly forced her feet to move. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the storm was trying to drag her backward. When she reached the porch, she lifted her small fist and knocked. Once, twice, nothing. She knocked again, harder, desperate. The door opened. A giant stood framed in firelight, taller than any man she had ever seen. He filled the doorway with broad shoulders and a chest wrapped in a heavy hide coat. Snow dripped from the brim of his hat. His beard was thick with frost. His eyes, dark and steady, studied her in a long, silent moment that felt like the earth itself had stopped spinning. This was To Nainilia. Some said he wasn't fully human, a wandering spirit dressed as a cowboy, a relic of the old frontier. Others said he was just a man too big and too quiet for the world around him. To Nolly, he was simply the first warm face she had seen since yesterday. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak. "Sir, my mom didn't come home last night." The doll slipped from her arms. Her knees gave out. She fell forward into the snow at his feet. For a heartbeat, the giant did not move. Then, without hesitation, he knelt and scooped the child into his arms. "Easy now. His voice was a low rumble almost swallowed by the wind. He carried her inside, closing the door with the weight of his shoulder. The storm threw itself against the wood, but the cabin held. Inside, the fire glowed low in the hearth. He laid her near it, stripping away her soaked boots and socks. Her toes were pale and frighteningly still. He wrapped them in wool, then draped 2 thick blankets over her small frame. Steam rose from her clothes as the warmth returned. She stirred faintly, mumbling something he couldn't catch. Toe leaned closer. "Mommy didn't come back," she whispered. His jaw tightened, and an old ache flickered behind his eyes, something he rarely let surface. "Rest, little one," he murmured. He retrieved her doll and placed it in her arms. When he lifted her coat to hang it by the fire, something slid out of the pocket and fluttered to the floor. A handkerchief. White cotton. Faded. The corner embroidered with a single name in Navajo stitching, Ashki Yaji To, froze. That name had brushed past him months ago in a dusty trading post near Montezuma Creek. A woman with haunted eyes, bruises she tried to hide, and a voice soft as the desert wind. She bought flour and apples, paid in coins, she kept wrapped in cloth, as if hiding them from someone. And now her child lay in his cabin, half frozen. He rose slowly, walking toward the window. Outside, the storm roared. Snow crashed against the glass. He could not search tonight. Not even he could survive that storm. But dawn would come, and when it did, he would ride. He turned back toward the fire. Nolly was breathing more evenly now, though her small body still trembled under the blankets. The giant crouched beside her, brushing a frozen curl from her cheek. He spoke softly, but the words carried a weight that filled the cabin. "The storm doesn't care how small you are," he said. "But I do." He kept his hand there a moment longer before standing and tightening the shutters. The storm shook the cabin like a living thing, but the giant didn't flinch. His mind was already hours ahead, mapping trails, searching for signs, preparing for danger he didn't yet have a name for. But he had a direction. And a reason. The morning came in shades of gray. The wind hadn't quit, but it had slowed now, less of a scream, more of a moan that swept across the trees like a restless spirit. Snow hung thick on the branches, draped in silence. Beneath the eaves of the cabin, icicles clung like claws. Inside the fire burned low, soft crackles breaking the hush. To Nainili stood by the window, staring out at the white world that waited. His coat was already on worn leather, creaking as he moved. A fresh bandolier was strapped across his chest. In one hand he held a length of thick wool. In the other, his old saddlebag. The quiet wasn't empty, it was watchful, heavy with intent. Behind him, Nolly stirred beneath the blankets. She blinked slowly, then sat up. Her hair was a halo of frizzed cheeks, blotchy from cold and sleep. The doll was still tucked against her chest. To turned. "You warm enough?" She nodded, but her voice was hesitant. "Is Mama back?" He crouched beside her. "Not yet. But we're going to find her." Nolly clutched her doll tighter. She said she'd be back before the sky turned gray. He watched her for a beat. This little girl, barely old enough to say full sentences, had crossed a blizzard to find someone. That kind of love didn't come from nowhere. "She meant to come back," he said, but something stopped her. Nolly looked down. "Is she lost?" To pulled the wool around her shoulders, bundling her like a papoose. "She's not the one who's lost." With slow, careful hands, he lifted her and settled her in front of him on the saddle, his arms circling to hold the reins. His voice dropped low just for her. "We're going to find the trail. But I need your eyes too, Nolly. You see anything out there, anything Mama left behind, you tell me. All right. She nodded again, serious this time. Outside, the snow crunched under the horses' hooves, deep and uneven. The world was a palette of white and gray and shadow. Trees stood like watchmen, their limbs burdened with frost. Crows circled far above, dipping through wind currents too cold to feel like air. They rode in silence for a long while. Mama said the flour was low, Nolly said suddenly. She said we needed to trade for more. Toe's brows furrowed. Trade where? She thought hard. The place past the blue trees, with the boxes of corn and loud man with red beard. That was enough. He knew the place, an outpost, part trading post, part saloon, tucked beyond the eastern bend of the forest, where pines took on a bluish hue. If Ashki had walked there, she would have taken the creek trail, cutting through the hollow, where the river bent toward the lowlands. Toe nudged the horse to follow that bend. Soon the line of trees gave way to a clearing. A modest cabin stood at the center, timber's warped chimney, cold snow drifted halfway up the door. Nolly leaned forward. That's where we live, she said softly. They dismounted. Toe carried her through the thigh-high snow and pushed the door open. Silence swallowed them. No fire, no movement. A bowl of porridge, half-eaten, frozen solid on the table. A shawl hung from a chair, unmoved since yesterday. Boots left by the door were untouched. Nolly stepped in quietly, her little boots crunching on the wooden floor. She looked around like she expected her mother to appear from behind a curtain. Mama, she whispered. No answer. Toe scanned the room, nothing looked stolen. No signs of a break-in, no overturned furniture. But that made it worse. If someone had attacked her, she didn't fight here. She left willingly, or was taken by surprise. The hearth was cold. The oil lamp on the table had burned out. Whatever happened, happened fast. He stepped outside, circled the cabin. Snow told stories to those who could read them. And Toe had been reading them since before he could ride. There, near the edge of the path, 2 sets of prints. One smaller, one larger. Both headed east toward the narrow trail that ran along the frozen creek, but not side by side. No. Ashkey's prints curved, staggered. The larger set crossed hers sharply. Then a smear, a drag in the snow. He crouched, low, gloved hand, brushing across a patch where the snow had melted slightly, then refrozen the way it does when something heavy is pressed against it. Then he saw it, caught in the thorn of a nearby bush, a torn strip of blue fabric. He pulled it free. It matched the wrap she wore around her shoulders the last time he saw her. His jaw tightened. She didn't leave by choice. He turned and walked quickly back toward the cabin. Inside, Nolly was sitting by the cold hearth, holding her doll and whispering to it. He knelt eye level. Nolly, he said gently, did Mama ever tell you about a man with big boots? Maybe someone with a loud voice. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't answer. Toe's voice softened. I think someone found her yesterday, and I think we need to find her back. She looked at him, small but fierce. Are you scared? He paused, then said honestly, I'm not scared for me. She stood, walked over, and slipped her hand into his. The gesture, so quiet, so trusting, felt like a promise. He led her outside, lifted her into the saddle once more, and climbed behind her. Snow fell again, soft but steady, dusting the trail ahead like a shroud. Toe stared into the trees, eyes narrowing. He'd seen signs of this before, back when he still wore a badge before he left the borderlands. Tracks too clean, cuts too precise. The kind of trail that wasn't meant to be followed. But he wasn't some green rider anymore. and he wasn't riding alone. As they moved, Nolly broke the silence again. Mama said to never go with strangers. She's right, he said. Nolly turned her head, her breath clouding between them. Are you a stranger? Taw thought for a long second. I don't know, he answered finally. But I'm not letting anything happen to you. She nodded once, satisfied. The doll peeked out from beneath the blanket, its red ribbon catching a flash of white light. He gripped the reins tighter, steering them east following the frozen riverbank, where the drag marks continued faint now, but still visible. His gut tightened. I buried my past, he muttered to no one but himself. But it dug its way out, and it's still coming for her. He didn't know if Ashki was alive, but he knew what kind of men left trails like this behind, and he knew how they ended. He had one more lead to follow before nightfall. A man named Braddock had once worked the outpost trading circuit near the Colorado-Utah line. A man with a temper. A man with a claim. If he'd found Ashki again, she wouldn't have had a chance to run. But Taw would give her one now, even if he had to bury more than just the past to do it. The trail narrowed as they followed the frozen creek winding deeper into the hollow, where the snow was thicker and the trees leaned low, weighed by winter's silence. The wind had calmed, but the air still bit at any skin left uncovered. Taw Nainili rode with Nolly tucked firmly inside his coat, her head pressed against his chest, the doll wedged between them like a small, sacred bundle. The drag marks in the snow were harder to read now. Time and weather had blurred their edges, but they were still there, uneven, staggered, sometimes interrupted by signs of someone crawling or resisting. Taw tracked them with the focus of a man who knew too well what was waiting at the end. They crested a small ridge above the creek. Nolly stirred. Cold, she murmured sleepily. I know, Taw said, adjusting the wool blanket around her shoulders. Almost there. They rode a little farther, the snow crunching rhythmically beneath the hooves. Then he saw it at the bend in the stream near a thicket of frozen reeds. A dark shape slumped in the snow, half buried under a drift. Not an animal, not a log. Something human. Taw's breath hitched. He stopped the horse. Nolly stirred again. What is it? He didn't answer. He dismounted fast, keeping Nolly wrapped in the blanket, propping her gently against the saddle. He stepped forward, boots sinking into the snow. The closer he got, the colder the air felt, not in temperature but in weight. A stillness that pressed on the chest. Ashki Yazi lay curled on her side, one arm folded beneath her, the other outstretched toward the trees. Her face was turned slightly upward, lips parted, skin nearly the same color as the snow around her. A deep bruise marked her jaw, and dried blood crusted along her temple. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. One boot missing. Taw dropped to his knees. He placed 2 fingers at her neck. A beat. Then another. Weak, but there. He let out a sharp breath, not relief exactly, but a loosening of something tight and bitter inside his ribs. Hang on, he whispered. You're not done yet. Behind him, he heard snow shift, little boots crunching softly. Mama Nolly had climbed down from the saddle and was walking slowly toward them, blanket dragging behind her like a trailing cloud. She stared at the still form in the snow. Her lip trembled. That's Mama! Taw reached out with one arm, blocking her from getting too close. Wait there. She's alive, but she's hurt bad. Nolly knelt beside him anyway. She didn't cry. She just stared at her mother's face like it would wake up if she looked hard enough. She whispered, I found you. Taw worked quickly. He pulled off his coat and wrapped Ashki inside it, lifting her gently. She barely stirred, just a small exhale, like the air had returned to her lungs for a second. He turned back toward the horse, now more burdened than ever. He lifted Ashki first, securing her across the saddle, then picked up Nali, setting her in front. He mounted last, wrapping his arms around both of them. The horse grunted under the weight. "Easy now," To said. "We're going home." They rode back slowly, carefully. Every jolt sent a tremor through Ashki's body, but her color stayed stable. Nali pressed herself close, her small hands gripping the saddle horn tight. Ta's eyes scanned the trail with every step, watching for more than snow. Someone had done this, and they hadn't done it quietly. "Snow covers many things," he muttered, voice low, but not guilt. They reached the cabin at twilight. The fire had burned down, but embers still pulsed in the hearth like a heartbeat. To carried Ashki inside, laid her on the cot, then stoked the fire high. He threw off his gloves, lit the oil lamp, and went to work. Warm water, clean cloth, a small tin of pine oil and honey salve. He cleaned the blood from her temple, careful not to disturb the swelling. He wrapped her feet in wool and massaged circulation back into her fingers with the oil, just as old Se had taught him long ago. Across the room, Nali sat curled in a blanket by the fire, watching every movement. Her eyes didn't leave her mother for a second. "She'll come back," To said quietly. "I've seen people come back from worse. She was shaking when I found her," Nali said, "but she kept saying my name." To nodded. "She kept moving. That means something." Ashki moaned faintly. Her eyelids fluttered. Her lips moved, but no sound came. To leaned closer. "Ashki, can you hear me?" Her lips cracked. "Nali," she whispered. "She's here," To said. "You're safe now." Her hand twitched toward the voice, but she didn't wake. To tucked the blanket tighter around her and added more wood to the fire. "I need help," he said aloud, more to himself than anyone else. Nali blinked up at him, from who To stood, and walked to the small trunk by the wall. He pulled out a satchel and a carved wooden token. "There's a man up the mountain. Old Se. He helped me a long time ago when I didn't have anyone else. He knows things. Healing things. Old ways." Nali tilted her head. "Can he fix her if anyone can?" To said, "It's him." He placed a kettle over the fire and handed Nali a cup of warm water. "Stay with her. Keep the fire strong. If anything changes, if she wakes up, you let her know I'm coming back." Nali didn't hesitate. She slid off the chair, sat beside the cot, and took her mother's hand. To checked his revolver, loaded 2 fresh rounds, and pocketed the token. He paused at the door. Snow was still falling. "I won't be long," he said. Nali nodded, small and serious. To stepped outside into the cold once more. But this time, he wasn't chasing a trail. He was preparing for what came next. The wind shifted as To Nainili rode higher into the canyon. It lost the sharp edge of the storm, turning slow and cold, like breath from a long-forgotten cave. The trail narrowed into a tight switchback path between 2 stone ridges, and the snow here was untouched, pristine. Not even a rabbit's footfall had disturbed it. Old Se lived where no one else dared, on the spine of the mountain, just above where the pines thinned into stone. Ta rode in silence, his eyes scanning the ridgeline, ears tuned to the crunch of hooves and creak of saddle. His muscles ached from riding with Ashki's body in his arms, but he barely felt them now. He only thought of her bruised face, the frost on her lips, the whisper of her voice as she said her daughter's name. He'd nearly lost her. and if old Se couldn't help, he still might. The trail curved one final time before it opened into a small shelf carved into the mountainside. Smoke drifted from a crooked chimney. A thin rope of sage hung above the doorframe, blackened with time. Toe dismounted and tied the reins loosely to a cedar post. He knocked once. The door opened before his knuckles hit a second time. Old Se stood in the threshold, smaller than Toe remembered, but still with the same piercing eyes, dark, narrow, knowing. His gray hair was braided down his back. A coyote tooth dangled from his neck. "Didn't think I'd see you again," the old man said, stepping aside. Toe entered, removing his hat. "You still rid the wind better than most," he said. C smiled faintly. "The wind's the only thing left that doesn't lie." The cabin was dim, warmed by a central fire pit. Herbs hung from the ceiling in bundles, sage, willow bark, rabbit brush. A woven rug covered the center of the floor, decorated with old Diné patterns. The walls were lined with carved shelves holding powders, roots, and stones. No clocks, no calendars. Only time measured in flame and silence. Toe sat cross-legged on the rug, while C poured 2 cups of cedar tea. "She's alive," Toe said, "but barely. Bruised, frostbitten. No blood in her lungs, but a head wound. She's breathing shallow. Frozen some. Legs mostly. But her daughter got to me before it was too late." Old Se nodded slowly. She strong Toe hesitated, more than most. They drank in silence. The fire popped in the hearth, sending shadows dancing along the wall. "You carry more than her weight on your back," she said. "I didn't come for a lesson." "Notesy said, but you came with a story. And in my experience, stories want to be told." Toe rubbed the scar along his jaw. "Her name's Ashki Yazi. I met her once just in passing. She was running from someone. Man from Texas, I think. Big, mean. The kind that leaves bruises in the shape of his boots." Se didn't flinch. The kind who takes, then takes again. "She's been hiding in the woods, raising her daughter, kept her head down. But he found her, dragged her out in the snow, and left her to die." C's fingers tapped the rim of his cup. "There is sickness," the old man said. "One that doesn't come from the body, but from men who believe they own more than they do. They do not take just flesh. They take names. They take the sound from a woman's voice." Toe stared into the fire. "She whispered her daughter's name," he said quietly. "Even half frozen, even bleeding. That's what stayed." Se stood. He crossed the room and pulled down 3 bundles from the ceiling. He opened a wooden box and selected a jar of dark salve. "I'll give you what I can," he said. "But this isn't only about wounds." "I know." He looked Toe in the eye. "If you bring her back to life, you must give her a reason to live." Toe didn't answer. He stood and took the offered pouch, slinging it into his satchel. Se added a tin of spruce tea and a worn cloth wrapped in pine gum. As Toe turned to leave, C stepped forward. "You remember what I taught you?" he asked. Toe gave a dry smile. "Enough to know when to ask for help." Se placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then listen now. The spirits have been loud this winter. Too loud. Something else is coming. It's not just her past." Toe's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean the mountain shook 3 nights ago. I haven't heard it like that since the Red Year. Something's moving through this land that don't walk on feet." Toe exhaled slowly. "You think he's not alone. I think she's the beginning of something." Toe stepped out into the snow, the mountain wind whispering in his ears. When he reached the saddle and mounted, Se called out behind him. Protect the girl. Heal the woman. But watch your back, giant cowboy. You left the world behind, but the world hasn't left you. Toe gave a small nod and rode back down the trail. The descent was slow. Light was fading by the time he reached the valley again. The cabin came into view just as the first stars began to blink into the sky. Smoke still rose from the chimney. He opened the door to find Nolly curled beside the cot, eyes red doll cradled in her arms. She didn't wake up, she whispered. Toe knelt beside the bed. Ashki was pale, but her breathing was deeper now, not so shallow. Her lips had color. He placed a hand on her forehead, warmer than before. She's still fighting, he said. He opened the salve and began applying it to her feet, her fingers. The pine gum went into a bowl with warm water and was set beneath the cot to loosen her lungs. Nolly watched without speaking. She seemed older somehow, like the day had taken something from her and replaced it with something harder. She needs you, Nolly said softly. Toe looked at her. I'm here, she met his eyes. Are you going to go if she gets better? I don't know yet. I want her to stay safe. Toe swallowed. Me too. Ashki stirred slightly. Her hand twitched beneath the blanket. Tomorrow, Toe said almost to himself, she might open her eyes. As the fire glowed and the medicine seeped into her skin, the cabin settled into quiet again. Outside, the wind returned, curling around the eaves, but another sound came with it. Hoofbeats. Faint. Approaching. Toe stood quickly, stepped to the door, hand on his revolver. A single rider came into view, a lantern swaying from her saddle horn. She dismounted before the porch. Tall hat, low coat, heavy with snow. She knocked once. He opened. She looked up. Name's Clara Redmond, she said. Deputy out of Montezuma Crossing. He didn't answer, just narrowed his eyes. I've got two things, she said. Questions and a warning. Toe stepped aside. What kind of warning? She stepped in, set her gloves on the table. Lucas Braddock's in the territory, she said, and he's asking about a Navajo woman with a child. Toe Ninely didn't speak for a long time. He stood near the firearms, crossed eyes locked on the woman who'd just walked into his cabin like she belonged there. Deputy Clara Redmond was tough as old leather, her coat still flecked with snow, revolver resting comfortably at her hip. She hadn't flinched once since stepping through his door. Most law riders kept their voices low around him. She didn't. You're sure it's Braddock? He asked finally, jaw clenched. Clara nodded, pulling off her wet gloves and laying them by the stove. He rode into Montezuma Crossing 3 days ago. Asked a shopkeeper if a woman named Ashki Yazi ever passed through. Told him no, but he left a picture behind. Said he'd pay for a lead. Toe's hands tightened into fists. He's still in town, he asked. She shook her head. No one's seen him since yesterday. Might be sleeping in a snow blind or holed up with some ranch drunk near the border. But he's not far. Across the room, Nolly stirred. She hadn't slept properly in days, but the low tones of conversation pulled at her even in dreams. Her mother lay still beside her, wrapped in blankets, color finally returning to her cheeks. The tea from Old Say had helped her breathing was no longer shallow, and the fever had dropped, but her body was still battered, and her spirit was still somewhere far off. Clara glanced at the cot. That her Toe didn't answer. She walked closer, then stopped short when she saw the bruises across Ashki's face. Her mouth pressed into a thin, tight line. Jesus, she muttered. I didn't think you weren't supposed to. Toe snapped. Clara turned back toward him unshaken. Don't take my warning as judgment. I've hauled men in for less, and I'd have shot Braddock on sight if he'd given me reason. Toe looked her over carefully. Then why come here? Why now? She crossed her arms. You think I didn't hear about the giant riding through the storm with a half-frozen child in his coat? Word travels even out here. I figured you'd found something or someone. Then I see a wanted man asking about a woman with a Navajo name. The math ain't hard. Toe turned back toward the fire. His voice was low. He left her to die in the snow. Clara took that in slow. She didn't ask for details. The room didn't need them. You plan on telling the sheriff, she asked after a beat. No. Why not? Toe turned. His eyes burned like coals. Because the law rides slower than the devil, and she's already bleeding. Clara didn't argue. She simply nodded, as if she'd expected the answer. I came because I thought you'd say that, she said. So I brought this. She pulled a folded piece of paper from inside her coat, an arrest warrant. She set it on the table without ceremony. Signed by Judge Mercer out of Grand Junction. Braddock's wanted for assault, illegal arms sales, and desertion. Texas wants him extradited. That's your green light. Toe didn't move. He stared at the paper like it was some kind of curse. I'm not a bounty hunter, he said. No, Clara replied. But you're the only one who knows what he looks like in the dark. And if he finds her before you find him, this ends bloody. Outside, the wind howled again. Inside, the cabin felt still as a grave. Nolly sat up, rubbing her eyes. Who's she? Clara knelt beside her, her voice gentler now. My name's Clara. I'm here to help. Nolly blinked. Are you going to take Mama away? Clara looked at Toe, then back at the child. No, sweetheart. I'm going to help make sure no one takes her again. Toe crossed the room and poured a cup of tea. He handed it to Nolly with a nod before speaking to Clara. You still got a radio up at the crossing, static and prayer, she said. But it reaches as far as Bluff if the wind's right. Then tell the sheriff to sit tight. Braddock's here for her. That makes this personal. You planning to go after him? Clara asked. Toe didn't answer. He stepped to the window and watched the snow fall. I think he's already on his way. Clara followed his gaze. Why? He exhaled slowly. Because men like him, they don't go quiet. They don't run unless there's a trail to follow. And she left a trail. He turned back toward the cot, where Ashki's hand had shifted slightly. Her fingers curled just barely around Nolly's. The movement was faint, but it was life. It was fight. She's coming back, he said quietly. And I need to be here when she does. Clara moved toward the door. I'll keep watch from the ridge. If he shows up, I'll signal. 2 lantern swings. Toe nodded. She stopped in the doorway. You ever think about what happens if she doesn't wake up? He didn't flinch. She will. And if she does what, then I figure that's her choice. Clara gave a half smile. You always did let people decide for themselves. He didn't smile back. After she left, Toe sat beside the cot. He dipped a cloth into warm tea and wiped Ashki's brow. Her eyelids fluttered, and for the first time since the storm, her lips parted. Toe, she whispered. His breath caught. I'm here. She didn't open her eyes, but her voice was clearer now. Nolly, is she safe? She's right here, he said. She found me. Ashki exhaled a shaky breath. I tried to come back. You did, he said softly. You did good. Her hand found his. I heard his voice, she said. In the trees. Toe's face darkened. He's close. She gripped his hand tighter. He won't stop. You know that. I do. She swallowed hard, her voice dry as bone. I don't want to run again. You won't. He looked toward the fire. Not this time. Not while he still had blood in his body. Ashki sat up slowly, propped against the headboard of the cot, her eyes adjusting to the warm flicker of firelight. Her hands still trembled when she tried to reach for the mug of spruce tea Toe had set beside her. He handed it to her without a word, his fingers brushing hers, steady and unshaken. She drank carefully. The bitterness didn't matter. It was warmth, and warmth meant life. Nolly curled up beside her, watching every movement. Her doll tucked beneath one arm, thumb resting near her mouth, though she was too old for it now. But tonight, no one told her to stop. Toe stood by the window watching the forest. His silhouette barely moved, tall and quiet as stone. Clara Redmond had not returned from her post on the ridge, but he hadn't expected her to. She knew how to stay hidden. Ashki cleared her throat. Her voice came out raw. You said he's close. Toe didn't turn. Closer than I'd like. I can feel it too, she said. Like bad air. Like the woods know he's near. Toe nodded once. He's waiting for night to fall deep. For quiet. For fear. Ashki looked down at her daughter, then back up at him. I'm not running this time. Toe finally turned to face her. I know. No, she said, firmer now. I need you to understand. I've spent the last 2 years hiding in holes, changing my name, keeping Nolly out of school, off books, away from everything. I forgot how to breathe unless I was checking the window every 10 minutes. I forgot who I was. Her voice cracked. But he doesn't get to keep doing that to me. Toe stepped closer. You don't have to do this alone. She gave a bitter smile. I've done everything alone. You're not anymore. She looked him in the eye. Her voice was soft but sharp. You don't heal by hiding. You heal by standing your ground. He didn't argue, just reached for a bundle behind the door and tossed it onto the table. Inside were lengths of barbed wire, an old hunting knife, and a coil of braided rope. Ashki raised an eyebrow. I take it you've done this before, she said. Too many times. He began reinforcing the cabin while Ashki sat and rested. Nolly helped where she could, dragging wood blocks, fetching tools. They boarded the back window, nailed heavy wool across the door to muffle sound, and scattered dried beans near the steps to hear anyone approaching. Every movement was careful, quiet, intentional. When the last nail was hammered in, Toe rolled his shoulder with a grunt. Ashki, now standing with effort, leaned against the wall and watched him. You think it'll hold? It's not the cabin I'm worried about, he said. Ashki looked down at her bare feet, then glanced at her daughter. Nolly was asleep by the fire, cheeks flushed from exhaustion. He won't stop, she said. He used to say I was his. Not a wife, not a partner. His. Like a thing. Toe crossed the room, lowered his voice. What happened the day you ran? She took a breath that shook. I was pregnant once before Nolly. I didn't get far into it before he pushed me down the stairs. The fire popped loudly like it didn't want to hear the rest. He said it was my fault, she continued. Said I made him mad. That if I'd been quieter, it wouldn't have happened. I stayed 3 more months after that. Toe's hands curled into fists. One night he passed out drunk. I took the cash, packed one bag, and rode until the horse collapsed. Changed my name at the border. Found this place. Built what I could. Every sound made me jump, but I was free. Until now. Toe's voice was low, and now he looked him straight in the eye. Now I'm not afraid to fight. They shared that silence like a pact. Outside, snow began falling again. Light at first like ash, then heavier. Taw stirred the fire. He'll come after dark. I know, she said. He's a coward. He only fights when he thinks no one's watching. You think he'll talk? Ko, she said. He'll hit first. Talk later. Toe loaded his revolver slowly, methodically. Checked the cylinder, holstered it. Ashkey watched. You won't let him take her. I'd burn this whole ridge before I let that happen. She walked to the cot, kissed Nolly's forehead, and whispered something in Navajo too soft for Toe to catch. When she turned back, her shoulders had squared. She wore the same torn shawl from the day she vanished. She didn't cover the bruises. Let him see what he did, she said. Toe offered her the second revolver. She took it without flinching. They settled in as the last light faded. The fire burned low to keep from casting shadows against the window. The lanterns were out. The cabin was quiet, breathing with them. The kind of silence that comes before a storm, not the kind with snow, but the kind with reckoning. A knock came at the door. Sharp, flat, final. Ashkey stood frozen. Toe raised a hand, signaling silence. Another knock, this time harder. A voice followed, slurred but unmistakable. Ashkey, I know you're in there. I saw your tracks. Ashkey clenched the revolver tighter. You left me, the voice continued. You took what's mine. Toe moved to the back door, cracked it open. Snow swirled in. He stepped into the dark like a shadow peeling off the wall. Ashkey crouched, pulling Nolly into her arms, whispering, It's okay, Mommy's here. You don't move, no matter what. Outside, the wind picked up. The man stepped into view. Lucas Braddock. Toe could see him clearly now, lantern in one hand, pistol on his hip, long coat dragging in the snow. His eyes were glassy from drink, but he moved with purpose. You can't hide behind that freak, Braddock shouted. He's nothing. I'll bury him. Toe stepped out from the stable, revolver raised. You've already buried enough. Lucas spun fast, firing wild. The shot split the air, missed. Toe didn't. His bullet slammed into Braddock's thigh, dropping him in the snow. The lantern flew from his hand and shattered flames hissing in the ice. Braddock screamed, clutching his leg. Inside, Ashkey pressed her lips to Nolly's head. Outside, Toe advanced. Lucas tried to crawl toward his gun. Toe kicked it aside, then drove his boot into the snow beside Braddock's hand. You don't get to come back here, Toe said flatly. You don't get to call her yours. Blood soaked the snow. Braddock's face twisted. You think this is justice, Toe bent low. No, this is protection. From the ridge, Clara's lantern swung twice. She'd seen the flare. Backup was on its way. Toe knelt, tied Braddock's hands behind his back with leather cord, then dragged him upright. You're gonna stand trial, he said. And when it's over, maybe you'll finally understand what it means to be powerless. The snow had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving behind a world that looked too peaceful for what had happened the night before. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low, just embers now pulsing orange in the gray light of morning. The room smelled of pine smoke and cooling tea. In the corner, Braddock lay tied, bleeding quiet. His leg had been bandaged just enough to keep him alive. Clara Redmond sat in a chair nearby, her rifle across her lap, boots planted, eyes never leaving the man. She hadn't said much after the flare went up, just rode in, disarmed him, and secured the warrant. She knew how to read a scene without asking questions. Her silence was its own kind of judgment. To stood by the window, arms crossed. He hadn't slept. He wasn't sure he could anymore. Outside, daylight was pushing through the trees, brushing gold across the untouched drifts. The storm had passed, but the weight of what remained was heavier than ever. Behind him, Ashki stirred in the cot. She winced as she sat up, but her movements were more certain now. Nolly had fallen asleep, wrapped around her waist, like a second blanket, her tiny hand still tangled in her mother's shawl. Ashki looked around the room at Braddock, slumped in the corner, at Clara standing guard, and at To, whose shadow reached toward her across the floor. It was done. She was still here. Nolly was still safe. And she didn't know what to do with the silence that followed survival. To turned when he heard her shifting. He crossed the room and crouched beside the cot. "You need anything?" he asked. Ashki shook her head. "Just catching up to the fact I'm alive." He nodded, his voice low. "You're not the only one." Clara finally spoke. "Sheriff's due by sundown. Marshal from Texas wants him extradited, but I told them he'll need to face charges here first. That buys you time." Ashki's gaze drifted to Braddock. He hadn't looked at her once since being caught. No apologies. No fear. Just coiled silence and cold eyes. That more than anything reminded her of who he was. She looked at Clara. "Thank you." Clara dipped her head. "Wasn't just me. Was the girl, was him." She nodded toward To. "You all fought." Ashki glanced at the cabin, its walls, its roof, the door reinforced with old beams and stubborn hands. Everything here had been built under threat. Everything had a layer of fear soaked into it. "I can't keep living like this," she said softly. "You don't have to," To replied. She shook her head. "It's not just him. It's what's left in me. Every time I close my eyes, I'm waiting for the knock, waiting for the shout. It's not easy to unlearn that." To sat back on his heels. "You don't have to unlearn it all at once." She met his eyes. "I've spent so long preparing for the worst. I don't know what to do with quiet." "Then take your time," he said. "The quiet will wait." Nolly woke a few minutes later, stretching, blinking at the light. She saw Braddock and stiffened, but her mother's hand calmed her. "It's okay," Ashki whispered. "It's over." The girl's voice was small. "You sure?" Clara spoke gently from her chair. "I'll sit right here till he's gone." Nolly crawled out of the cot and crossed the room. She reached for the stub of charcoal on the table and a rough sheet of parchment. She sat on the floor, tongue between her teeth in concentration, and began to draw. Ashki smiled faintly. "She's been doing that since she was old enough to hold a stick." "What does she draw?" To asked. "Us," Ashki said simply, "and what she thinks home looks like." They didn't speak for a while. The cabin was still full of that strange, fragile kind of peace that only comes after fear finally releases its grip. To stood and stepped outside. The light hit his face like a blessing. The world smelled clean, earthy, alive, not dead. He walked to the ridge where Clara had kept watch the night before. The trees creaked lightly in the breeze. Birds had returned cautiously, flitting between branches. Somewhere in the valley, a fox barked once. He didn't hear footsteps, but he felt her presence. Ashki joined him, a blanket draped around her shoulders. Her breath came in quiet clouds. They stood in silence for a while, looking out over the trees, not speaking, because nothing needed to be said yet. Finally, she said, "You saved us. You saved yourself," he said. "You made the choice. You stood your ground. I wouldn't have made it without you. I wasn't going to let anything happen to either of you." She looked up at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "I used to believe trust was dangerous, that it was just a trap with a pretty face." He didn't interrupt. She continued softer. "But not now. You're not like him. Not like any man I've ever known." Toe said nothing at first. Then his voice low, almost embarrassed. "I used to believe my heart had frozen solid." She turned to him. "And now I don't know, but it's thawing." She smiled at that, truly smiled, and it was a sight he didn't realize he'd been waiting to see. Inside, Nolly's voice called out, "Mama, look!" They turned and walked back into the cabin together. Nolly held up her drawing proudly. 3 stick figures stood in front of a log cabin, one tall, wearing a wide hat, one with long hair, one small, holding both their hands. Behind them, a sun peeked over the mountains. A dog that didn't exist yet stood beside them. Ashki knelt down beside her. "That's beautiful." Nolly pointed at each figure. "That's you, that's me, and that's Uncle Toe." Toe raised an eyebrow. "Uncle, huh?" Ashki laughed. "Well, you did drag her out of a blizzard." He looked at the drawing again. Something inside his chest tightened, but it didn't hurt. "Not this time." Clara stood and stretched. "Sheriff will be here by supper. I'll ride back and prep the paperwork." Ashki nodded. "Will you come back?" Clara smiled. "If you'll have me. I think this place might need a real fence someday." "You're welcome any time," Toe said. Clara gave Braddock one last hard look before heading for the door. "He can rot for all I care, but make sure you keep that little girl's world safe. She deserves it." And then she was gone. The cabin door closed. The silence remained. But now it was the kind of quiet that welcomed life, not the kind that feared it. Ashki sat by the hearth. Nolly climbed into her lap. Toe took a seat nearby, arms resting on his knees. She glanced at the drawing again, still pinned between her fingers. "It wasn't love," she murmured. "Not yet." Toe looked up. She smiled, but it was something like it. By late March, the last of the snow had melted from the edge of the ridge, revealing dirt paths and patches of stubborn grass trying to push through. The cabin no longer smelled of cold and ash. It smelled like pine boiled coffee and something close to hope. Toe had repaired the fencing along the south pasture with cedar rails. Ashki was walking without pain, now moving slower than she used to, but with a steadier rhythm. And Nolly, she laughed more. She sang to herself when she helped gather firewood, little made-up songs with half words and big feelings. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that builds over weeks of peace. The kind that felt like maybe, just maybe, this time it would hold. One morning, while Nolly played with pine cones in the yard, and Ashki stitched a quilt inside, Toe went out to the shed. He was sorting old tools, thinking about fixing the barn door next, when he noticed a crate in the back, tucked beneath a moth-eaten tarp. It was the one he hadn't touched since he first came to this land. He hadn't needed what was inside then. Now he didn't know what made him lift the lid. Maybe curiosity. Maybe instinct. Inside were old letters, tin badges, a belt he hadn't worn in 5 years. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a piece of oiled canvas, was a bundle of papers and a thin, hard-bound journal. He sat on a stool, dust rising around him, and opened it. The handwriting was jagged, impatient, scrawled in thick ink. It wasn't his. The journal had belonged to Lucas Braddock. He flipped the pages. Some were rants, scrawled angry letters that looked like they'd never been sent. Others were cold, factual logs. Names, towns, money owed, people hurt. One name appeared more than once. Ashki Yazi. Toe's breath caught as he turned a page and saw a half-torn photograph glued to the inside cover. A man's face, Braddock's, and beside him another man lean hawk-eyed with the same coldness in his stare. The photo was labeled in pencil, Braddock and L. Yazi, Santa Fe, 1879. Toe stared at the name. L. Yazi, not Ashki. He flipped the next page and everything inside him locked down. She took more than my daughter. She took my blood, lied, ran, changed her name. But blood don't change. It remembers. His hands trembled as he shut the journal. He stood fast, gripping the book tight, and stormed back to the cabin. Ashki looked up as he entered. She was seated by the fire, her quilt half folded across her lap. "You okay?" Toe didn't answer. He placed the journal on the table between them, opened it to the photograph, then stepped back. Her face froze. Slowly, she reached out and touched the page. Her finger landed on the man next to Braddock. She closed her eyes. "I was hoping it was gone," she whispered. Toe's voice was low. "Who is he?" "My brother," she said. "Luca." Toe blinked. "Braddock called you his wife." "I let him," she said. "It was safer, easier to disappear as the woman he controlled than as the sister of the man he hated." She sank into the chair. The light shifted across her face, showing shadows she hadn't worn in weeks. Toe waited. Ashki ran a hand through her hair, staring into the fire, like it might burn the truth out of her. "My brother Luca ran with Braddock during the worst years she began. They robbed caravans, small banks. Never killed, not at first. Just scared people. Took what they wanted. But then, something changed. Braddock started getting violent. Luca tried to stop him. They split in Santa Fe." She swallowed. "Braddock blamed me, said I turned Luca against him. He started showing up at the ranch drunk, angry. At first he only yelled. Then came the fists. I tried to leave, but there was nowhere to go." She looked up, meeting Toe's eyes. "I wasn't just running from Braddock. I was running from what I let happen, from what I didn't stop." Toe's jaw flexed. "You were protecting your life. Your daughter's life." Ashki shook her head. "And lying to yours." He softened. "You never lied about who you are now." A beat passed, then another. She leaned forward, voice quiet. "There's more." He nodded. "I found out last year Luca might still be alive. Someone told me he was working up near the Wyoming border. Freight wagons using a different name. I thought about finding him. Then Braddock showed up again, and I buried everything." Toe looked down at the journal, the scrawled pages, the hate that seeped out of every line. "He never stopped hunting you." "No," she said, "because he wasn't just trying to own me. He wanted revenge. For my brother. For his pride." Toe's fists curled. "And you carried that weight alone. Until now." Outside, the wind shifted. Nolly came running in, cheeks pink from cold. "There's a man on a mule at the edge of the woods." Toe grabbed his coat, but Ashki raised a hand. "Wait," she said. "He's not a threat." Toe frowned. "How do you know?" She stepped to the door, looked out through the crack. I know how my brother rides. Luca Yazzie rode slow mule clopping steady through the last stretch of thawed earth toward the cabin. He didn't wear a hat, just a frayed scarf pulled tight around his neck. His coat was worn patched at the elbow, and dust clung to his boots like he'd come a long way without stopping. He looked thinner than Ashki remembered. Older, too. A man carved up by time and regret. Toe stood on the porch, one hand resting near the revolver on his hip, not in threat, but in habit. He didn't trust men who arrived unannounced, and he especially didn't trust them when the look in their eyes matched the one he used to see in the mirror. Ashki came to the door, just as Luca reined in. He slid off the mule without a word, dropped the reins, and looked at her. She didn't move. He took off his scarf and held it in his hand like it might shield him from the years between them. "You still got that stare," he said finally, voice quiet. Ashki didn't blink. "You still got the nerve to use it." Toe glanced between them but didn't speak. Nolly watched from behind her mother's leg, half curious, half afraid. Something in her instinct said this man wasn't a stranger, not fully, but not safe yet either. Luca's voice cracked. "I didn't come to fight." Ashki stepped out onto the porch. "Then why now?" He sighed, eyes lowering. "Because I heard what happened. About Braddock. About you." Her voice was sharper now. "And where were you when it mattered I was surviving?" he said. "Same as you." "No," she snapped. "I was running for my life. Hiding with a baby in my arms. You were just hiding from your guilt." Luca flinched. Toe stepped forward. "Enough." Ashki turned on him. "You don't know him, I don't," Toe said calmly. "But I know what it sounds like when someone's trying to make it right." Luca looked up at him, then back at his sister. "I didn't come to beg forgiveness. I came to see if I still had a sister." Ashki looked at him for a long time, eyes burning. Then, without a word, she turned and walked back into the cabin. Nolly followed quietly. Toe hesitated. "You hungry?" he asked Luca. Luca nodded once. "Starved." They ate in silence. Corn stew, flatbread, hot water with spruce bark. Luca didn't touch the tea. His hands shook slightly as he ate like he hadn't had a hot meal in days. Ashki sat near the hearth watching the flames. Nolly curled in her lap, stealing glances at the stranger. After a while, Luca finally spoke again. "Braddock was poison," he said. "I didn't see it soon enough." Ashki didn't answer. "I stayed with him too long. I let him talk me into things I thought I'd never do." She turned slowly. "Like what?" He met her gaze. "Like turning a blind eye while he beat you." Toe stiffened, but didn't move. "I didn't raise a hand to you," Luca said, voice tight, "but I let him treat you like property. Because I was too scared to stand up. Because I thought if I kept him close, I could control him." Ashki's eyes narrowed. "And when you couldn't, I left," he said. "Ran to the border. Changed my name. Buried the truth so deep, I forgot who I was." "You forgot me," she said. "No," he said. "I just didn't think I deserved to come back." Silence stretched. Then Nolly's voice, small and quiet, "Are you really my uncle?" Luca looked at her like he'd never seen anything so fragile. "Yes," he said softly. "And I'm sorry I wasn't here." Nolly blinked. "Do you know any stories?" Toe's mouth twitched. Ashki hid her surprise. Luca smiled faintly. "I know one or two." Nolly nodded. "You can stay, but only if you tell one before bed." Ashki looked down at her daughter, eyes softening. She finally spoke. "One night. You stay one night. Then we'll see." That night after Nolly had fallen asleep, To and Luca stood outside the cabin under the stars. A low fire crackled in the pit between them. "She's strong," Luca said, looking at the door. "Stronger than I remember." "She had to be," To replied. Luca looked at him. "You care about her?" To didn't respond. Luca continued. "I don't blame you, but you should know there's more coming." To's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? I heard Braddock talking before I left the freight camp. Said he wasn't working alone. Said there were men in Utah and Colorado who wanted her quiet. Not just for personal reasons. For money." To's voice dropped. "You're just now telling me this." "I wasn't sure it was true," Luca said. "But if Braddock had ties, they don't stop with him." To stared at the fire. "She just got her life back." Luca looked at him. "Then help her keep it." They stayed out there a long time. Ashki watched from the window. She didn't trust easily. She never had. But something in the way Luca stood, shoulders bent, hands buried in his coat, reminded her of her mother's stories. About how people aren't always who they were. About how some folks rot and others learn. The next morning, Luca packed his saddlebag. Ashki met him at the steps. "You don't have to leave," she said. "I do," he replied. "But I'll come back." She hesitated. "Why?" He looked her in the eye. "Because you're the only family I've got left, and I want to earn that again." She didn't answer, but she handed him a cloth bundle of bread and jerky. He smiled. "Thanks, Ash." She almost smiled back. To watched from the barn as Luca rode off down the ridge. Not running, just going. Ashki stood beside him. "He's not fixed," she said. "Neither are we," To replied. "But maybe that's not the point." The letter arrived on the first warm day of April. It came by way of a wiry post rider, the kind who didn't ask questions. He handed To the sealed envelope, nodded once, and rode off without waiting for a reply. The wax was cracked, the corner singed. There was no return address. Only a single line scrawled across the front to the woman once known as Ashki Yaji. Ashki read it standing on the porch, eyes narrowing as she scanned the contents. The page inside held no greeting, no signature. Just a map, hand-drawn, marked with a red X just north of the four corners, and a single line beneath it. "He's not the last. The ones who paid him are still watching. Finish what was started." To watched her carefully. Her face was calm, but her grip on the paper tightened until her knuckles went white. Ashki looked up. "It's not just Braddock. There are others." To stepped closer. "You know who sent this?" She nodded slowly. "I think it's my brother." "Luca." "No," she said. "Not him. The other one." To froze. "You have another brother." "I did," she said. "But we buried him in 1875, or thought we did." She stepped inside her mind, already racing the paper, clutched in one hand. Nolly was playing by the hearth with her wooden animals, humming softly. Ashki placed the letter face down on the table, shielding it from view. To followed her in. "You said Luca was your only family." "I believed that," she said. "But if this is from Sani, then someone lied." The name settled like dust. To spoke carefully. "What do you remember about him?" Ashki sat, her voice distant. "Sani was older than both of us. More soldier than sibling. Never stayed long in one place. He was angry even when he smiled. Something happened to him out east. I don't know what. When he came back, he barely spoke. Always carried a coin in his pocket, kept flipping it like he was waiting for fate to land heads up. She paused. He left one night after a fight with our father. Next time we heard his name, it was on a casualty list from the war. Toe crossed his arms. If he's alive, where's he been all this time? Waiting, she said. Watching. Or maybe hiding in plain sight. He picked up the map. This place north of Four Corners. It's desert land. Nothing but rock, old outposts, some tribal ruins. Ashki looked at him. Maybe that's why he chose it. They spent the next hour tracing routes, checking supplies. Nolly watched them with wide eyes, sensing the shift in the air, but not asking questions. Not yet. By evening, Ashki sat alone on the porch. Toe had gone to check the horses. The sun dipped low, casting long orange streaks across the sky. Clara arrived just as the first stars blinked awake. She dismounted in one smooth motion, glancing at the firelight inside. You planning something? She asked. Ashki handed her the letter. Clara read it fast, then read it again slower. Hell, she muttered. You think it's legit? I don't know, Ashki said. But it feels like something I can't ignore. Clara looked her over. You really ready for this? Ashki didn't hesitate. I don't want to be hunted anymore. You think this is about finishing something, Clara said. But maybe it's about starting something new. Ashki looked away. It's both. Maybe they can't be separated. Taw stepped out of the barn, brushing dirt from his hands. We leave at first light. 2 days hard ride. Clara raised an eyebrow. And what about the girl? She stays here, Ashki said. With you. Nolly stepped out onto the porch, just then, small feet padding quiet across the boards. I want to go too, she said. Ashki crouched in front of her. You can't, baby. This is something I have to do with Uncle Toe. Is it dangerous? Ashki smiled faintly. Probably. Nolly thought hard. Will you come back? Ashki looked her straight in the eye. Always. The child nodded. Then I'll wait. Clara scooped Nolly into her arms. I've got her. You just come back in one piece. That night, the three of them packed light water-dried meat blankets, spare ammo. Ashki pulled her old shawl from the chest, wrapped it over her shoulders like armor. Toe checked the saddle straps twice. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Just before dawn, they mounted up and rode out. The landscape stretched wide and empty shadows curling back with the rising sun. The farther they rode, the quieter it became. No birds, no distant dogs, just wind over dry brush. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking the land marked on the map. It wasn't what they expected. There was no camp, no smoke, just an old trading post, half buried in sand, roof caved in. A rusted sign dangled on one hinge, Stag's Supply. Est. 1868. Ashki dismounted, boots crunching over brittle earth. She stepped through the broken threshold, heart pounding. Inside, old shelves stood like bones covered in dust and spider webs. In the back corner, someone had cleared a space, swept clean bedroll fire pit. Fresh. He was here, she said. Toe knelt beside the fire ring. Ash was still warm. Then they heard it. A coin flipping through the air. Sharp. Clean. Then caught in a gloved hand. From the shadows behind the counter, a voice. Still know the sound of silver. Little sister Ashki froze. Sonny. He stepped into the light. Taller than she remembered. His face was weathered but unmistakable. Same eyes. Same scar along the jaw. Same coin rolling between his fingers. "I thought you were dead," she said. He smiled flat, cold. "I was. But ghosts don't rest easy." Toe stepped between them. Why the letter? Sonny ignored him. "Because the game's changed. You killed the dog. But the ones who owned the leash are still coming." Ashkey's voice was tight. "Then help me stop them." Sonny laughed once. "You think I came here to help?" She went still. He looked at her eyes like flint. "I came here to warn you. Stay out of this, or they'll burn everything, including that little girl of yours." Ashkey stepped forward. "If they come, I'll be ready." He shook his head. "You still don't understand." Then his tone changed, flat, tired. "You think this is about you. It's not. You were just the bait. I was the target." Ashkey blinked. "What? They're not after your past," he said. "They're after mine." The air inside the abandoned trading post felt heavier after Sonny's words. Ashkey stared at her brother, her pulse hammering in her ears. The shadows on his face flickered with the sway of light filtering through a broken window. The coin in his hand stilled, then disappeared into his coat. "You were the target?" she asked, voice low. Sonny nodded, stepping closer. "Back in '71, I joined a recon militia under the federal banner. They called us Shadow Company. We weren't on paper. We weren't supposed to exist." Toe tensed beside her. "I've heard rumors. Blacklist ops used for things the regular army wouldn't touch." Sonny nodded. "We ran missions in the border territories. Quiet work, ugly work. We were told it was for national security to stop foreign agents trying to stir tribal uprisings. But that wasn't the truth." Ashkey's voice was cold. "What was?" Sonny took a breath. "We weren't hunting foreign spies. We were eliminating witnesses, settlers, tribal leaders, anyone with knowledge of land deals forged in blood. The government had struck illegal contracts, sold off reservation lands to railroad barons. If word got out, the whole thing would collapse. So they used us to keep it quiet." Toe cursed under his breath. Ashkey leaned against a broken beam. "So why run? I didn't sign up to kill my own people," Sonny said. "When I found out what they'd done to the Diné in Canyon de Chelly, I walked. Took evidence with me, records, testimonies. I thought if I gave it to the right hands, the truth would come out." "And instead?" Toe asked. Sonny's eyes darkened. "They killed everyone who helped me. My contact in Durango, a marshal in Denver, even the preacher who let me hide the ledgers under his church." He looked at Ashkey. "I changed my name, hid in freight camps, but I always knew one day they'd find me. Then Braddock showed up." Toe stepped forward. "Braddock was connected to this." "Not at first," Sonny said. "He was a mercenary. But someone paid him to watch me, then kill me. When he failed, they moved to their next tactic. Get to me through family." Ashkey went pale. "Through me?" "I didn't know they found you," Sonny said, "until it was too late." She swallowed, her voice shaking. "And this map, this place. Why draw me here?" "Because they're coming here next," he said. "I intercepted a courier 2 weeks ago. They think this post is where I buried the files. They'll be here by sundown tomorrow." Toe nodded slowly. "So we make our stand here." Ashkey looked between them. "It's not just about survival now." Sonny met her eyes. "No, it's about exposure. If we can hold them off long enough, get that evidence to the right hands, we can blow this thing wide open." Toe ran a hand down his jaw. You still have the documents. Sonny walked to a hidden panel in the floor, pried up the boards. He pulled out a tin box wrapped in cloth and set it on the counter. Inside were faded journals, military orders stamped in red, a folded map, and a ledger filled with names and dates. This is what they're willing to kill for. Ashki studied the names, some she didn't recognize, others she did. Old council leaders, tribal elders, men and women who had simply vanished without explanation. Victims of a truth buried too deep for too long. We send this to Clara, she said. She's got reach. She'll know who to trust. Sonny nodded. I can ride tonight. I know a shortcut through the canyon. Toe shook his head. Too risky. You're the one they want. If they spot you, they'll follow. Ashki stepped forward. Then I'll go. Both men turned to her. I'm not the target, she said. They won't expect me to be the courier. Toe started to argue, but she cut him off. This is my fight too now. They used me, hunted me, broke everything I built. I'm done hiding. Toe's jaw tightened. Then finally he nodded. Sonny pulled out a folded cloth and handed her a small revolver. Take this. Light fast. Don't use it unless you have to. She nodded. I'll ride through the canyon before dawn. If I move fast, I can make it to Clara by midday. Toe looked at her. You sure about this? I have to be, she said. She wrapped the documents tight, strapped them to the saddlebag of the mule they'd brought. She wore no hat, no shawl, just a rider's coat and determination. Before leaving, she crouched by the fire and whispered a quiet prayer. For Nali, for peace, for the strength to finish what her brother started. Taw walked with her to the edge of the ridge. If something happens to me, she started. It won't, he cut in. But if it does, she continued, protect her. Toe's voice broke a little. With everything I've got. She climbed into the saddle, looked back once, then rode into the dark. Sonny and Toe stood there for a long time, the wind rising around them, stirring sand into whispers. She's more like our mother than she knows, Sonny said. Toe nodded. Stubborn, brave, tired. They turned back to the trading post. The sun dipped low, blood red on the horizon. Toe pulled the rifle from its sling. We got till tomorrow. Sonny flipped his coin once, then caught it. The first shot came just after noon. It cracked through the dry air like lightning over stone, splintering one of the beams above the trading post's shattered window. Toe ducked, pulling Sonny down with him behind the stacked crates they'd piled into a barricade. Outside, 5 riders advanced from the south ridge, black dusters, wide-brimmed hats, rifles glinting in the sun. No badges, no colors, just hired ghosts of a forgotten war paid to erase the past with bullets. Guess we didn't get overestimated, Sonny muttered, reloading. They brought enough firepower for a war. Toe wiped sweat from his brow. Then let's remind them we ain't dead yet. The post was falling apart, cracks in the walls, holes in the roof, but it held. Just barely. They'd laid traps at both doors, scattered shards of glass in the brush, and dug shallow trenches on either flank. It wasn't much, but it was enough for one good stand. Toe fired back, forcing one of the riders to take cover behind a sandstone outcrop. Sonny moved to the west side, aiming through a narrow break in the wood. I see 3 more coming from the east, he called out. Flanking. They don't want witnesses, Toe said. And they sure as hell don't want that ledger leaving this place. They both knew this wasn't just about land or secrets. It was about erasure of truth, of names of people who refused to disappear quietly. And neither of them planned on vanishing. For hours, the firefight raged. Dust rose in choking clouds, the crack of rifles echoing off canyon walls. Sani took a graze to the shoulder but kept shooting. Toe's leg bled from a ricochet, but he grit his teeth and stayed standing. They pushed the men back once, twice, but by late afternoon it was clear the enemy wouldn't stop until they were sure the job was done. Then, just as the sun began to fall, a horn blew from the ridge. The gunfire stopped. From the north came a rider, alone, fast, fearless. Ashki. She rode like fire down the ridge, coat flapping, dust trailing behind her. Behind her followed 5 more riders, lawmen. And at their head, Clara Redmond, shotgun slung across her shoulder, eyes hard as the desert floor. The mercenaries didn't wait. They turned, scattered, tried to vanish into the rocks. A few managed. Most didn't. Within 20 minutes it was over. The dead were buried in shallow graves. The wounded, those who surrendered, were cuffed and packed for transport to the nearest county seat. Clara approached Toe and Sani, who were now sitting on the edge of the porch, bloodied and worn, but breathing. "You boys sure know how to start a conversation," she said. Toe chuckled, wincing at the movement. "Good thing we called the right listener." She nodded toward Ashki, who stood not far away, her coat streaked in red dust. "She reached me just in time. Told me everything. That ledger's already on a train to Denver. U.S. Marshal's office is waiting." Sani looked over, exhausted. "You trust them. I trust the storm it'll cause," Clara said. "The names in there go deep. They'll be too busy covering their asses to come for you again." Toe leaned his head back against the post. "About damn time the truth made some noise." Ashki walked over. She looked at both men, then crouched beside Toe. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded. "Just leaking a little." She smiled weakly. "Thank you." "You brought the cavalry," he said. "That ledger might save a lot more than this place." Sani looked between them. "Maybe this is the part where we all stop running." Ashki turned toward her brother. "What'll you do now?" He took a breath, slow and steady. "There's land up near Taos. Quiet. I thought I might try planting something that doesn't bleed." She stood and hugged him tight, long and without words. "I never stopped hoping you'd come back," she whispered. "I never stopped wanting to," he replied. He rode out that night. No ceremony, no promises. Just a quiet nod to Toe, a last look at his sister, and then the sound of hoofbeats fading into dusk. Back at the cabin 3 days later, Ashki stood with Toe by the garden they'd begun to till. Nolly ran nearby, laughing with a pine stick in hand, pretending to chase bandits. The air smelled like rain might come. Wildflowers pushed up through the dirt, reckless and stubborn. "You think it's over?" she asked. Toe leaned on the shovel. "No, but I think we bought enough peace to grow something new." Ashki looked toward the distant mountains. "They tried to erase us. And failed," he said. "Because we left marks that don't fade." She smiled softly. "I want her to know the truth someday." "She will," Toe said. "But on your terms." That evening, Ashki wrote a letter. She didn't send it, just folded it into a small box, where she kept the ledger's copy, old photographs, and Nolly's drawings. One day she'd hand it to her daughter. Not yet. For now, the truth could rest. Not hidden, just safe. That night, as the stars came out, and the wind rustled through the pines, Ashki sat on the porch steps, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Toe joined her, 2 cups of tea in hand. He passed her one. "What now?" she asked. He thought a moment. "Now we build a life worth defending." She looked down at the steaming cup, then back out into the dark, and whispered almost to herself, We are not what they made of us. We are what we survived. Behind them, Nolly slept soundly in her bed. No nightmares, no knocks at the door. Only the hush of a home that finally held peace, and the silence of a past that no longer chased them. Not because it was gone, but because it had finally been faced.